Anti-Israel rallies are showing no signs of slowing down here in the United States and around the world. Take a look at this scene in our nation's capital. It's a massive crowd of demonstrators on the National Mall for a rally demanding an immediate ceasefire to the conflict. And let's be clear here. Israeli children were burned alive. So the call for a ceasefire is a call for Israel not to defend itself, as they have a right to do, as laid out in the laws of war at the United Nations. Protests erupting throughout the Middle East, Europe, and South America, with demonstrators burning Israeli and American flags, clashing with authorities, and even attempting to storm embassies. In response to that, the State Department is issuing a worldwide caution alert for Americans overseas. Quote, due to increased tensions in various locations around the world, the potential for terrorist attacks, demonstrations, or violent actions against U.S. citizens and interests, the Department of State advises U.S. citizens overseas to exercise increased caution. Let's bring in Christian Whiton, former State Department senior advisor in the Trump and Bush administrations and senior fellow at the Center for the National Interest. Christian, welcome. You know, for a lot of Americans, you know, they see these protests at embassies and their mind immediately goes to Benghazi. They hear a State Department admonition like this, a warning of caution, and they think back to days immediately following 9/11. Where do we stand when it comes to a terror threat for U.S. citizens abroad and at home?
Well, it's serious and growing, and it seems to have come upon us rather quickly, but actually it's been building up for some time. We have a president who has made jihadism and anti-Americanism and pro-Islamism great again. You remember the innovation of his predecessor was to change the dialogue dramatically from this lame excuse that you have to solve Israel-Palestine in order to solve the Middle East to the reality that Iran and political Islam is what drives the problems, and you have to address that. And that shift actually led to peace between the Arabs, diplomatic recognition between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and others. And Joe Biden has really turned back time. So he came into office, he gave money to the Palestinians. His own government admitted that was diverted to Hamas. And the payola to Iran, the $6 billion for hostages, but tens of billions more in oil that's been allowed to be exported in violation of U.S. sanctions to countries like China. So all this has culminated, along with a distracted United States. And we saw this last night in the president's address. United States distracted with a Europe-first foreign policy, a war in Ukraine that the American public does not want to fund, and being distracted from real threats like China, Iran, and Islamism.
Christian, you make several important points. And I think of all the lines in the president's address last night, here's the one that stood out to me. American leadership is what holds the world together. And I think about the disgraceful Afghanistan exit. And you know who was watching that? Putin. And he decided it's time to go for Ukraine. And you know who was watching that? Iran. And it was time to unleash Hamas after they got that $6 billion unfrozen. And I don't think it's any accident that there is a cause and effect here. I saw this headline this morning, flashback to the New York Times. Biden reverses Trump terror designation for Houthis in Yemen, okay? So reverses the terror designation. Then the subsequent headline I read from the last 24 hours is this: missiles fired at a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Red Sea that were shot down were fired by Houthi militia in Yemen. Is there a cause and effect here? When you take away the terror designation and exudes weakness on the world stage, that's what you get.
It is. Weakness is very provocative, and we haven't just been weak and morally equivalent between the Palestinians, Hamas, who are bad, and Israel, who is good, but also with the Iranians. And this has really pissed off Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, other allies in the Gulf, which are the Houthi, which is yet another Iranian proxy army, as is Hamas and as is Hezbollah. The Houthi in Yemen, who are firing missiles at Saudi and the UAE, and the United States did virtually nothing, just sort of ignored the 9/11 for Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Also, the Iranians have been harassing ships in the Persian Gulf carrying oil, and some of those ships are flagged by countries with which we have defense alliances or compact of defense agreements, and some of those were headed for the United States. The U.S. Navy finally took some action over the summer, but that kind of real-world weakness combined with the moral equivalence we saw last night. Yes, the president condemned Hamas, but calling for self-determination for Palestine? I mean, we know what that leads to. We saw Arab Spring. Have we learned nothing last night? And we need, frankly, different leaders. You know, people like Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor and presidential candidate, who had the clarity to say, you know, we shouldn't be giving $100 million to Hamas, to Gaza at this time. We need more leadership and clarity.
Christian, thank you very much.